You stand up, walk into the kitchen, and just stand there, blank. You have no idea what you came for. You tell yourself, I'm getting old, or I've just been too busy lately, my head is a mess. Then you walk back to the other room, see your water glass, and remember. Oh, right. You think it's nothing, but here's what your brain is doing without you knowing, and it happens every single time you walk through a door. Every day, dozens of times. And there's something I want you to hold on to until the very end of this video. A perspective on this phenomenon that modern neuroscience and ancient spiritual traditions from Rome, Japan, India, all independently arrived at. And it's not just about forgetting things in the kitchen, it's about who you are, and who is actually walking through the doors of your life. Be honest, have you ever walked into a room, stood there completely blank, and had no idea what you were about to do? Most people assume this is a sign of a poor memory, of distraction, of age. And because everyone assumes that, we quietly blame ourselves every single time it happens. But here's what's actually going on. The human brain doesn't store memory like a continuous recording. It divides the world into discrete event segments, each one tied to a specific space, a specific context, a specific psychological state. When you walk through a door, the brain receives a signal. Context has changed, and it performs an operation that scientists call event segmentation. The old file gets closed, a new one opens. The memory of why you walked in doesn't disappear, it just gets pushed outside your immediate access zone, like minimizing a window to the taskbar. It's still there, you just can't see it anymore. In 2011, a research team led by Gabriel Radvansky at the University of Notre Dame ran a series of experiments in both real environments and virtual ones, and concluded that walking through a doorway itself triggers forgetting, entirely independent of the distance traveled or the time elapsed. They named it the doorway effect. From your brain's perspective, a door is not an architectural object. It's a cognitive boundary, a point at which the entire context of the previous moment, your goals, your emotions, your intentions, gets packaged into long-term memory to make room for what's next. You are not broken. Your brain is working exactly as designed, a design refined over millions of years of evolution to keep you focused on the environment you're in right now, not the one you just left. And here's what makes it even more fascinating. This effect doesn't only happen with physical doors. Have you ever picked up your phone only to stare at the screen with no idea what you were about to do? Or sat back down at your desk after making coffee and spent a moment searching for the thread of thought you were just following? That's also an event boundary. There just wasn't a physical door involved. Neuroscientists have found that the brain creates event boundaries not only based on physical space, but on any sufficiently large shift in context. Time, the object of your attention, your emotional state, even a single notification on your phone. Every time there's a strong enough disruption, the brain draws a dividing line, and the memory from the previous segment becomes harder to reach. This explains why people lose deep focus after checking email mid-task, why a short phone call can wipe out an hour of careful thinking, why waking up in the morning, many people feel like a different person than they were the night before. A 2017 study from the University of Birmingham found that humans process information in discrete events, not in a continuous stream. And the brain is constantly predicting when one event will end in order to prepare for the next. This process is nearly entirely automatic and sits outside conscious awareness. From your brain's point of view, you are not living a continuous life. You are living a series of short clips, each one framed by boundaries you almost never notice. And here is where it gets interesting, because ancient spiritual traditions had already figured this out long before fMRI machines or neuroscience labs existed. If this is resonating with you, hit like and subscribe. It's the best way for us to reach more people who need to hear this. Most of us think of a door as an architectural object, wood, hinges, a handle, But in most ancient cultures around the world, the threshold, that liminal space at the exact point of crossing, was not an object. It was a state. In Roman tradition, the god Janus, the two-faced deity, was the god of doorways, of beginnings, of transitions. He didn't stand in one room or the other, he stood in between. January, the month, was named after him because it is the threshold between the old year and the new. The Romans understood that the moment of transition doesn't belong to either world, it is its own world. In Japanese Shinto, the Torii gate, the red gate you see before every shrine, is not there to block or to direct. It's a cognitive device. When you pass through a torii, you are performing a deliberate act, leaving the ordinary world and entering sacred space. Your body moves, but more importantly, your mind is asked to shift states. The physical boundary creates a psychological boundary, on purpose. The Hindu tradition calls the transitional space between two states sandhi, literally meaning joint or junction. Sandhi appears everywhere in Hindu philosophy, between sleeping and waking, between the inhale and the exhale, between one thought and the next. These are considered special moments, not because they matter practically, but because in the between, consciousness is at its most flexible, its most receptive. The Celtic tradition has the concept of thin places, locations where the boundary between the physical world and the world beyond becomes thinner. These places tend to be thresholds in a metaphorical sense, a shoreline that is neither fully land nor fully sea, dawn and dusk that are neither fully day nor fully night. These are places where people are urged to pay particular attention, because there, what is usually hidden might become visible. What's strange is this. All of these traditions, from different continents, different eras, with no knowledge of each other, arrived at the same point. The moment of transition is a special moment, not because it is sacred in a mystical sense, but because at that point, the old hasn't fully left and the new hasn't fully arrived, and in that gap, something important is happening. Neuroscience in 2011 called it an event boundary. The ancient Romans called it Janus. The Japanese called it Torii. Different names, but they were all describing the same thing. We talk about event boundaries as though they only affect short-term memory. You forget someone's name, forget what you went to the kitchen for, lose the thread of a thought. And that's true, but if the brain segments memory by context, what happens to emotion? In 2016, psychologist Mark Howard at Boston University published research showing that the brain doesn't just segment informational memory, it segments emotional memory too. When you cross an event boundary, it's not only the memory of a task that becomes less accessible, the emotional state you were carrying also gets packaged into the old file. This explains something many people have experienced but never had a name for. You're furious after an argument. Then you leave the room, go downstairs to get some water, and when you come back, the anger is slightly lighter. Not because you thought it through, because the door did its work. Or the opposite. You're in a state of flow, writing, creating, working deep, and someone calls you to another room for a moment. When you return, you sit in front of the keyboard but can't find that feeling again. Not because you lack focus, because the door already closed that file. Tibetan Buddhism has the concept of Rigpa, pure awareness, complete presence in the current moment. Tibetan meditation masters describe maintaining Rigpa through transitional moments, standing up, crossing a threshold, shifting from one activity to another, as one of the most difficult practices in meditation. Not because the body is hard to move, but because the mind naturally tends to reset at every doorway. Carl Jung called transitional moments liminal space. In Jungian psychology, liminal space is where the old has dissolved, but the new has not yet formed. A state of in-between that is uniquely vulnerable, but also uniquely rich with the potential for transformation. Jung believed that liminal periods are when real change becomes possible, because that is when the old no longer has the strength to resist. But from a neuroscience perspective, this is also precisely when you are most likely to lose the thread connecting you to the person you are trying to become. Think about it. Every time you make a resolution to be calmer, more focused, more patient with the people you love, and then step into a new situation, a new room, a new context, a piece of that resolution gets closed into the file of the old context. Not because you lack willpower, but because your brain, faithful to its evolutionary design, has segmented the event and the person you were trying to be got left behind on the other side of the door. Here is what almost no one mentions when they talk about the doorway effect. If the brain creates an event boundary at every threshold, and event boundaries affect memory and emotion and psychological state, then a doorway is not just a place where you lose something. It's a place where you can consciously choose what to carry through. Researchers building on Radvansky's work found that the doorway effect can be reduced by bridging the two contexts in the mind before crossing. If you remind yourself of your intention, not the action, but the intention right before stepping through, recall improves significantly. Because intention is encoded at a deeper level than action, it's tied to purpose, to emotion, to meaning. The Japanese practice this almost unconsciously through the ritual bow when passing through a torii. The bow isn't only a gesture of respect, it's a memory tag. It tells the brain, this moment matters. Encode it differently from ordinary moments. Carry this quality of attention into what comes next. In Vipassana meditation, there is a practice called sampajanya, clear comprehension of purpose. Whenever moving, the practitioner is asked to know clearly where they are going and why. Not as an intellectual exercise, but as a way of keeping the continuous thread of awareness unbroken at each event boundary. Marcus Aurelius wrote in the Meditations, "At every new beginning, ask yourself whether what you are about to do is worthy of the person you wish to be." He didn't know about event boundaries, but he understood that moments of transition are the moments you are most likely to lose your way, and also the most important moments to ask yourself who you are. This doesn't mean you need to turn every trip to the kitchen into a ritual. Your brain was designed to segment, and that is a feature, not a flaw. But when you stand at the threshold of something larger, a new job, a new relationship, a new chapter of your life, what your brain is doing is no different from what it does when you walk through the kitchen door. It closes the old file, it opens a new one. And the question is, do you know what you're carrying into that new file? Remember when I said there was a perspective on event boundaries that both neuroscience and ancient traditions agree on, and that it's not just about forgetting things in the kitchen, but about who you are? Here it is. The doorway effect is not a failure of memory. It is evidence that you are not a single, continuous entity moving through time. You are a series of versions, each one created at each event boundary, each threshold, each moment of transition. That is not a bleak idea, it is a liberating one, because it means every door you walk through is a genuine opportunity to become someone different. Not in a poetic sense, but in a biological and psychological one. Your brain is ready to open a new file. The question is whether you want to decide what gets written on the first page. The Japanese bow at the torii because they understand that what is changing is not just their position in space. Marcus Aurelius paused at every new beginning to ask himself one question, because he understood that intention does not survive thresholds on its own. Tibetan monks practice maintaining rigpa through every step because they understand that awareness is not a state you achieve once, but something you choose again at every doorway. And you, crossing dozens of doors every day, almost none of them consciously, you are constantly becoming someone new. The question is not whether it's happening whether you notice or not. The next time you stand at a threshold and can't remember why you came, don't rush back. stand still for just a second, because your brain is not betraying you. It is giving you a rare gift. The moment when the old file has closed, the new one hasn't opened yet, and in the space between two worlds, a version of you is waiting for you to decide who it will be.